Before starting off with each topic in the history of modern India, let me take you through a timeline with some important events of modern Indian history to get a sense of the subject at a very broad level. The history of modern India is largely centered around Indian encounters with the Europeans, and there specifically the ones in Western Europe. That is a curious fact, isn't it? So, how did that happen? Well, India was widely known for its spices, textiles, precious stones, and other commodities, which fetched high prices in the European markets. But when the Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople in 1453, the direct contact between the Europeans and India declined. To re-establish trade links, Western European countries like Spain and Portugal invested their resources to find a trading sea route to India. One of these earliest expeditions was led by Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese explorer. He succeeded in reaching India through an all-sea route circling Africa at the Cape of Good Hope to reach Calicut in 1498. Over the next few years, the Portuguese started establishing factories and settlements in the coastal regions of India. And to oversee these developments, the Portuguese also appointed governors in India. The next European traders to arrive in India were the Dutch. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company was formed. The Dutch mostly had their eye on establishing trade in the East Indies, the region presently known as Indonesia. They also had trading centers in India where they set up many factories. After the Dutch, there came the English. They came just behind the Dutch in Surat in 1608. They hoped to establish a textile factory in Surat, but were unsuccessful as the Mughals declined the offer due to the Portuguese influence. This convinced the English that overcoming the Portuguese was the means to establish trading in India. Hence, in 1612, the English defeated the Portuguese naval squadrons at Swali near Surat, winning themselves the Mughal support to establish a factory in Surat in 1613. By 1619, they had received permission to establish many other factories in India. In 1620, the Danes arrived in India. They also established factories in India, but they were known for their missionary activities rather than commerce. Meanwhile, the Dutch were aware of the increasing might of the Englishmen and felt that it posed a challenge to the Dutch interests. As a result, they clashed with the English from 1665 till 1667. At the end of the Second Anglo-Dutch War, the Dutch had to give up all their settlements in India. The last of the Europeans to come to India were the French. The French created the French East India Company in 1664. One of the prominent contributions of the French was the development of Pondicherry in 1674. The French expansionist policy in India was challenged by the English. These traditional rivals fought with each other in the three Carnatic Wars to establish supremacy in the Indian subcontinent. This period also shows the diplomatic abilities of Robert Clive, a commander in the British East India Company. His role was pivotal in defeating the French during the Third Carnatic War. Robert Clive also battled against Siraj-ud-Daulah, the Nawab of Bengal, and his French support at Plassey in 1757. Clive's decisive victory at the Battle of Plassey gave the British East India Company control over Bengal, which was arguably one of the biggest regions back then. The rise of the British in India is often attributed to factors such as their naval superiority, military skill, discipline, and so on. Still, there were internal factors that facilitated the British. One of the most significant of them being the decline of the Mughals in India. The Mughal Empire had expanded to such an extent that a centralized ruling system was ineffective. The unity and stability of the empire had been shaken up during the long and strong reign of Aurangzeb. Yet, the administration was still quite efficient, and the Mughal army was quite strong at the time of his death in 1707. Many policies launched by Aurangzeb were largely controversial and gave rise to the regional conflicts. Many rulers after Aurangzeb lacked strong leadership qualities and corruption was rampant. To make matters worse, the invasion of Nadir Shah in 1739 and multiple invasions of Ahmad Shah Durrani between the years of 1747 and 1769 left a huge blow on the Mughal Empire. This led to the decline of the Mughal Empire. Meanwhile, many other kingdoms such as the Marathas, Mysore, Sikhs, Bengal, and Hyderabad had arisen. These kingdoms further engaged in succession wars for the Mughal throne. The association of the Europeans in regional politics and the succession wars accelerated the decline of the Mughals. In addition to the decline of the Mughals, winning the Carnatic War and the Battle of Plassey gave the British a stronghold in the subcontinent. Their victories allowed the British East India Company to appoint puppet rulers in Bengal, Carnatic, etc. Bengal, however, was their crown jewel. In 1759, the Dutch and puppet Nawab of Bengal, Mir Zafar, attempted to recover Bengal. But the Dutch forces were bested by the British in the Battle of Chinsura. By 1764, Nawab of Bengal, Mir Qasim, Nawab of Awadh, Shuja'ud-Dawla, and the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II conspired to recover Bengal from the English. The combined army lost to the English in the Battle of Buxar, and the Mughal Emperor became a pensioner of the East India Company. In 1765, the Treaty of Allahabad was signed at the end of this particular war. As per the treaty, Mir Qasim handed over the regions of Midnapur, Bardhaman, and Chittagong to the English for maintaining their army and also permitted duty-free trade in Bengal. Meanwhile, the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II gave the English the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. After the Battle of Buxar, the British established a dual form of government in Bengal by which Diwani, or power to collect taxes, was carried out by the company, and the Nizamat, that is, the police and judicial matters, by the Nawab. Essentially, the Nawab had to depend on the English to maintain order and peace in the state. But the dual government system was ineffective, as the Nawab and the company had neglected the public welfare of the state. Hence, when Warren Hastings became the governor of Fort William in Bengal, he abolished the dual government system and remodeled the administration. Warren Hastings was appointed to the role by the Regulating Act of 1773. This act brought about the British government's involvement in Indian affairs in the effort to control and regulate the functioning of the East India Company. It recognized that the company's role in India extended beyond mere trade to administrative and political fields. It introduced judicial reforms as well by setting up the first Supreme Court. Warren Hastings also brought effective means of tax collection between 1772 and 1774. In 1774, he acquired a new title as the Governor-General of British East India Company, supervising all English settlements in India. Meanwhile, in the south, the British might was challenged by the Mysore kingdom led by Hyder Ali and later by his son Tipu Sultan. They fought 4 wars between 1767 and 1799, which are popularly known as the Anglo-Mysore Wars. The British fought the first 2 wars against Hyder Ali. Tipu Sultan continued the war after the untimely death of Hyder Ali during the Second War and faced forces sent by Lord Wellesley in the 4th. From time to time, the neighboring kingdoms such as the Marathas, Nawab of Carnatic and Nizams of Hyderabad aligned with the British to subdue the Mysore rulers. Governor-General Lord Wellesley managed to gain support of the Nizam of Hyderabad through the Subsidiary Alliance to defeat Tipu Sultan in 1799 and placed a young Wudiyar ruler as their puppet. The Subsidiary Alliance was a tool introduced by Lord Wellesley during his governorship from 1798 to 1805. According to this system, Indian rulers had to pay a subsidy to the British to maintain the army. In return, the British would protect them from their enemies, both internal as well as external. But through this alliance, Indian rulers also lost their sovereignty over their territories to the British. The Nawab of Awadh was the first ruler to take up the Subsidiary Alliance after the Battle of Buxar. However, the Nizam of Hyderabad was the first to accept a well-framed Subsidiary Alliance. Tanjore was another prominent region to become a part of the alliance. The Marathas, they also became victims of this alliance. During the reign of Chhatrapati Shahu Bhosle I, the 5th Chhatrapati of the Maratha Empire, Gaikwads of Baroda, Bhosles of Nagpur, Holkars of Indore, Sindhias of Gwalior, and the Peshwas of Pune came into prominence, and the empire evolved into a confederation. The confederacy was under the Peshwas' rule and worked well until the 3rd Battle of Panipat in 1761. The defeat at Panipat and the death of the Peshwa Madhavrao I in 1772 weakened the control of the Peshwas over the confederacy. While each family ruled independently with a united front against the British, they often tended to quarrel amongst themselves. The Marathas and the British engaged in 3 wars from 1775 to 1818, which let the British control members of the Maratha Empire one by one. Finally, in 1818, the British took control of the Maratha territory and abolished the Peshwaship. Sindh joined the Subsidiary Alliance in 1839, which gave British considerable control over the region. Although the British had assured territorial integrity to the Amirs of Sindh, they annexed the region after a brief campaign by Sir Charles Napier in 1843. Meanwhile, the Sikhs tried to keep the British at bay, but both engaged in 2 all-out wars between 1845 and 1849 called the Anglo-Sikh Wars. The British annexed Punjab, and the war ended with some Sikh squadrons eventually fighting alongside the British in the years to come. Lord Dalhousie, the Governor-General from 1848 to 1856, used the Doctrine of Lapse to annex many regions. As per the doctrine, if a ruler of a princely state controlled by the British died without a male heir, the British would gain control of the territory. While the adopted son of the ruler got the right for the ruler's private property, the British had the final say in bestowing the state to the adopted son or annexing it. States such as Satara, Jhansi, Nagpur, Baghat, Udaipur and Sambhalpur lost control through the doctrine. While many frustratingly became part of the British Empire by accepting these rules, some of them resented the policies and administration of the British from the beginning. The Revolt of 1857 is a prominent example. The revolt began at Meerut on 10th May 1857, and the immediate cause was the refusal by sepoys to use the greased cartridges in infield rifles provided by the British Army. Before this, Mangal Pandey, a sepoy of the 34th Native Infantry, attacked a British officer at Barakpur on 29th March 1857. The revolt was a cumulative effect of the British expansionist policies, economic exploitation, and administrative changes over the years that had adversely affected all rulers of the Indian states, sepoys, zamindars, peasants, traders, artisans, pandits, Maulvis, etc. The revolt rippled across the country, especially Delhi, Meerut, Lucknow, and Kanpur. Thus, the event is considered the first war of independence by many Indian nationalists and historians, although imperial loyalists call it the Sepoy Mutiny. While the revolt produced regional leaders like Nana Sahib and Rani Lakshmibai, the British were also able to capitalize the lack of a strong single leadership and end the reign of the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar. Queen Victoria was declared the Empress of India, and through the Government of India Act in 1858, East Indian Company transferred control of India to the British Crown. India fell under the direct rule of the British. By 1859, the British managed to quell the rebellions in different parts of the country, essentially re-establishing their authority over India. Apart from the Subsidiary Alliance and the Doctrine of Lapse, the British introduced many policies to control the Indian kingdoms. In 1784, Pitt's India Act was introduced to distinguish between the commercial and political functions of the company. This act gave the British government supreme control over the company's affairs and administration in India. The enactment of Charter Acts was done every 20 years from 1793 to 1853. This was another step that let the British East India Company extend its control over the British territories in India. Further, Acts gave more power to the British by opening trade from company to all British subjects and expanding the Governor-General's jurisdiction from Bengal to most of India. Another important step taken by the British was the permanent settlement introduced by Lord Cornwallis in Bengal and Bihar in 1793. This regulation recognized zamindars as the owners of the land, and the peasants were reduced to the mere status of a tenant. Moreover, the government fixed a whopping 10 by 11th portion for itself and 1 by 10th for the zamindars from the collected revenue. While these acts strengthened the British control over India, some British policies developed elements of a modern state in India. And a prominent example of such policies is the abolition of sati in 1829. It was passed by the first Governor-General of India, Lord William Bentinck, with the efforts of Raja Ram Mohan Roy and other Indian social reformers. Bentinck also enforced the prohibition of female infanticide, which was then prevalent among some Rajput clans and other castes. In 1856, the British passed an act that allowed Hindu widows to remarry. The passing of this act can be attributed to the prolonged efforts of social reformers like Pandit Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Another area of social upliftment that the British revolutionized was education. The Charter Act of 1813 directed the company to sanction 1 lakh rupees annually for encouraging Indians in education and promoting the knowledge of modern sciences. This was further encouraged in the famous Lord Macaulay's Minute of 1835, which favored teaching of Western sciences and literature through the English language alone. Another major impact on education in India was when Charles Wood, the Secretary of State, sent an educational dispatch in 1854. The dispatch suggested that the government of India should take the responsibility of educating the masses in India. It proposed the use of vernacular languages to impart education in primary schools and English as a medium to instruction in higher education. The significance of Wood's dispatch was that it gave the impetus to establish departments of education and universities in Calcutta, Bombay and Madras by 1857.